In the winter of 1816, when England still carried the fatigue of war beneath its silks and silver, power lived not only in Parliament or beneath the crown, but in the hands of men whose titles predated memory and whose estates stretched farther than most men ever traveled. Dukes were not merely noblemen. They were quiet sovereigns of land, livelihood, and reputation. To displease one was to risk disappearance from society itself, a fate often endured in silence by those without fortune or protection. Duke Alistair Harrington of Ashcombe had been raised to understand this power as an inheritance rather than a choice. At 32, he possessed the assured bearing of a man accustomed to obedience, his authority honed by years of managing tenants, political allies, and obligations that rewarded control over sentiment. His London residence reflected him precisely: restrained elegance, dark woods, orderly ledgers, and rooms designed for purpose rather than comfort. He did not consider himself cruel, only practical, and practicality had never before failed him. Eliza Fairleigh understood power differently. At 24, she had learned its cost too young, watching her family's gentility erode when her father's debts surfaced like rot beneath polished floors. Education and refinement, once her quiet assurances of security, became fragile ornaments in a world that valued dowries more than intelligence. Employment as a lady's companion spared her from outright disgrace, yet it demanded constant vigilance, for women in her position survived by appearing grateful, agreeable, and invisible all at once. She had served in several households before Ashcombe, but none had unsettled her as deeply as the Harrington's orbit. Though she was not in the Duke's direct employ, she moved often within his sphere, accompanying his cousin, Lady Wetherby, to dinners and political gatherings where conversation carried more weight than contracts. Eliza listened carefully, not from ambition, but necessity, for knowledge was often the only currency left to women without fortune. It was this attentiveness that drew the Duke's interest. He noticed how she remembered names, how she withdrew when talk edged toward impropriety, how she neither flattered nor fawned. In a society where most sought advantage, restraint appeared almost defiant. Over time, he began to test her presence, asking questions that seemed idle, requests framed as courtesy rather than command. Eliza answered politely, offering nothing that felt like betrayal, until one winter evening when courtesy was set aside. The study was warmed by firelight and authority in equal measure. Harrington spoke without preamble, outlining his expectation with the calm precision of a man accustomed to compliance. He required information. He explained, no more than observation, nothing illegal or improper. It would benefit him politically, and in return, he implied protection, continued employment, and security. The offer was measured, almost generous, and delivered with the assumption of acceptance. Eliza listened without interruption. She understood the bargain instantly, as women like her were trained to do. Silence in exchange for safety. Compliance in exchange for bread. The unspoken truth was sharper. Refusal meant poverty, uncertainty, and social erasure. Acceptance meant survival at the cost of self-respect. She felt the weight of her circumstances pressing against her ribs, urging submission, urging sense. When she declined, her voice did not waver. She thanked him for his consideration and said simply that she could not do as he asked. The Duke regarded her with faint surprise, then displeasure, though neither disturbed his composure. He explained her replaceability with detached clarity, informing her that he could hire 50 like her by week's end. It was not meant as cruelty, merely fact, and he expected the truth of it to bend her resolve. Instead, Eliza met his gaze with an expression he could not immediately name. It was not defiance nor fear, but recognition, as though she had always known this moment would arrive. "Do it," she replied. The words were soft, yet final, and before he could respond, she inclined her head in proper respect and walked away, leaving behind the certainty he had mistaken for control. Her departure was unceremonious. No raised voices followed, no doors slammed, No audience bore witness. She collected her few belongings that same night and left Lady Weatherby's household by morning, stepping into a London winter that offered no assurances beyond cold and indifference. By evening, her name had already begun to fade from the rooms where it had once been spoken without consequence. For society, nothing had occurred. A companion dismissed was neither news nor scandal. For Harrington, however, the silence that followed unsettled him more than any argument might have done. He waited for regret, for necessity to drive her back, for word that she had reconsidered. None came. Days passed, then weeks, and the space she left behind refused to close. He told himself the matter insignificant. Yet he noticed how other companions answered too quickly, how their eagerness grated, how obedience, once reassuring, now felt hollow. The words he had spoken returned to him unbidden, not as triumph, but as an echo that revealed its own emptiness. For the first time, his authority had failed to secure the outcome he desired. Eliza, meanwhile, confronted the consequences of her choice without illusion. Respect did not pay rent, and dignity did not keep out the cold. She took smaller rooms, sold a silk ribbon she had once treasured, and refused offers that carried familiar undertones of obligation. Each refusal cost her comfort, yet strengthened a resolve she had not known she possessed until it was tested. In the quiet of her narrow lodgings, she wondered if she had been foolish, if pride had masqueraded as principle. Yet when she recalled the study, the measured voice, the certainty of her disposability, she knew she would choose the same again. Some losses, she realized, with a price of remaining oneself. London continued its rhythms regardless. Carriages rattling over cobblestones, candles burning low in drawing rooms where alliances were shaped with smiles and omissions. Harrington moved among these spaces as he always had, yet with a new awareness of their fragility, sensing how easily influence slipped when unquestioned obedience was no longer assured. Eliza, too, moved carefully through her days, learning how quickly society forgot and how fiercely memory could cling where it was least welcome. Between them lay an unspoken understanding, formed not by promises or affection, but by a moment of truth that refused to fade, binding their futures more tightly than either would yet admit. The story of their crossing paths had not ended with dismissal, but begun there, rooted in pride, necessity, and a choice that defied expectation. What followed would test not only their hearts, but the very rules that had shaped them, demanding a reckoning neither power nor poverty could prevent. Fate, patient and observant, had marked them both, and London would soon witness the cost of underestimating quiet resolve entirely so. Spring arrived in London without apology, bringing with it renewed appetite for spectacle, gossip, and judgment. And as the city shrugged off winter's restraint, so too did its appetite for quiet ruin. Eliza Fairleigh learned quickly that survival required movement, not visibility, and she structured her days accordingly, walking early, speaking little, and accepting work that kept her hands busy and her name unremarked. Needlework, copying correspondence, tutoring the daughters of tradesmen who desired refinement without inquiry. Each task preserved her independence while draining her strength, yet she bore the fatigue with a composure born of necessity rather than patience. Her circumstances narrowed, but her resolve sharpened. She refused invitations that arrived unspoken with expectation, declined favors too generous to be without cost, and trained herself to accept discomfort as proof of choice rather than punishment. At night, when the city quieted and doubt crept closer, she reminded herself that dignity, once surrendered, was rarely returned intact. It was a lesson learned not from books, but from watching others disappear behind polite smiles and locked doors. Duke Alistair Harrington observed these same months with growing irritation he could neither name nor dismiss. The efficiency of his household faltered in ways too subtle to criticize, and the political maneuvering he had once enjoyed now felt hollow, its rewards diminished by a persistent sense of miscalculation. He had replaced Eliza Fairleigh within days, Yet each successor revealed the same deficiency. They listened to be useful, not to understand. Their compliance was loud, their discretion performative, and he found himself silencing conversations he once encouraged, mistrusting the ease with which loyalty could be purchased. He made inquiries, initially without intention, then with deliberate care. Her name surfaced rarely, as though spoken too softly to travel far, yet each fragment of information unsettled him further. She had not returned to service under another patron. She had not appealed to distant relatives. She had endured, quietly, stubbornly, without invoking his name or seeking his aid. The restraint felt accusatory, as though her absence itself was a judgment. When assistance reached her, it arrived stripped of origin. A landlord softened his terms. A seamstress recommended her to a circle that paid fairly. A physician accepted her payment in installments without explanation. Eliza recognized the pattern immediately, and resentment flared sharper than gratitude. Charity offered without consent was merely control disguised, and she refused to acknowledge it, forcing herself to continue as though nothing had changed. Independence, she learned, could be challenged even by kindness. London, however, noticed what she did not announce. Whispers moved through drawing rooms with practiced subtlety, curiosity blooming where obscurity had been expected. A dismissed companion surviving alone was uncommon. Doing so without visible decline was suspicious. Speculation grew, not malicious at first, but intrigued, and her name began to circulate, untethered from her consent. Some suggested she possessed influence she concealed. Others implied protection granted by powerful interests. None asked her directly, for curiosity preferred distance to truth. Harrington heard these murmurs with a tightening awareness that he had misjudged the reach of his own involvement. What he had intended as correction had transformed into attention, and attention into speculation. His reputation depended upon control, yet control had slipped the moment she refused him. Each rumor threaded back to him, implicating not action, but interest, and interest was a vulnerability he could not afford. He resolved to end it by confronting her, yet found himself delaying, rehearsing explanations that satisfied neither pride nor conscience. The power he held over land and men did not extend cleanly to memory, nor to the peculiar authority of a woman who had nothing left to lose. When at last an invitation surfaced that promised inevitability rather than pursuit, he recognized it as opportunity and threat entwined. The winter ball at Carlton House was announced with all the weight of royal approval, a sanctioned convergence of ambition and spectacle where alliances were measured by proximity to favor. Attendance was selective, curated not merely by rank, but relevance, and Eliza's name appeared upon the list through sponsorship she neither sought nor refused. The invitation bore no explanation, only expectation, and she accepted with a steadiness that surprised even herself. Preparation demanded courage as much as composure. She chose simplicity over display, aware that restraint, when worn deliberately, could rival opulence. Each fitting, each measured step toward public visibility felt like a test of conviction. She would not attend as an apology, nor as a spectacle, but as proof that survival need not masquerade as submission. Harrington learned of her acceptance not from his own inquiries, but from a colleague's idle remark delivered with a knowing pause. The realization struck him with unexpected force, not fear of scandal, but anticipation edged with dread. He imagined her entering a room he commanded, not as a dependent, but as an equal presence, and understood then that the outcome could not be controlled. The evening arrived dressed in candlelight and expectation. Eliza stepped into visibility with measured grace, her posture unyielding, her expression composed. Conversation faltered where she passed, not in condemnation, but recognition, as though the room acknowledged a narrative it had not authored. Harrington watched from across the hall, acutely aware of every distance between them, every choice that had led to this moment. Their eyes met only briefly, yet the silence it created was unmistakable. It held accusation, curiosity, and something neither had prepared to confront. Around them, music resumed, laughter returned, and society continued its performance, unaware that a reckoning had begun. Eliza turned away first, not in retreat, but in resolve, leaving Harrington with the unmistakable knowledge that the power to conclude this story no longer rested solely with him, and that what followed would demand more than authority could provide alone. The moment did not belong to music or light, but to the pause between them, where memory gathered its strength and refused to be ignored. Duke Alistair Harrington crossed the room with deliberate restraint, conscious of every observing eye, every whispered calculation that followed his movement. Eliza Fairleigh felt his approach before she saw him, as one senses a change in weather, inevitable and charged, and she steadied herself, unwilling to grant him the power of surprise again. They exchanged the courtesies expected of them, words polished and careful, their tones betraying nothing of the history that pressed between syllables. To the room, it was an unremarkable exchange, yet beneath the civility lay the weight of unsaid truths, each phrase measured against the cost of honesty. Harrington asked after her health, her comfort, her prospects, and Eliza answered with composed brevity, offering no invitation beyond politeness. It was she who broke the pattern, requesting a private word, her voice calm but resolute. The boldness of it startled him more than reproach might have done, and he inclined his head, guiding her toward a quieter gallery where the noise softened and the chandeliers cast gentler light. There, removed from immediate scrutiny, yet not from consequence, silence settled between them once more. "I did not expect to see you here," he said at last, the admission unguarded. "I did not expect to be invited," she replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. The balance between them shifted subtly, no longer employer and subordinate, but two individuals bound by a moment neither could dismiss. Harrington spoke of miscalculation, of assuming necessity would compel compliance, of mistaking silence for consent. His voice held no apology yet, but something closer to reckoning, as though he were discovering the truth alongside his confession. Eliza listened, not with satisfaction, but with discernment. She spoke of the study, of the certainty with which her worth had been measured and dismissed, of how easily power mistook itself for judgment. She did not accuse him of cruelty, only of ignorance, and the distinction struck him with unexpected force. Ignorance could be remedied, cruelty could not. "I believed authority sufficient," he said quietly. "I was wrong." The words were neither dramatic nor absolving, but they were honest, and honesty, she had learned, was rarer than affection in such rooms. Still, she did not soften. She spoke of choice, of the cost of survival without self-respect, of how dignity, once surrendered, demanded payment with interest. Harrington listened without interruption, aware that listening itself was a departure from habit. He offered what he could not before, acknowledgment without condition. No position, no protection disguised as generosity, no expectation of return. Only recognition of her autonomy and regret for having challenged it. The restraint of the offer mattered more than its content, and Eliza felt the tension within her ease, not dissolve, but settle into clarity. Around them, the ball continued, oblivious, yet the world they occupied had narrowed to intention and consequence. Harrington realized then that desire had not driven him to seek her again, but respect, grown painfully late. He understood also that respect did not entitle him to forgiveness, nor to presence, nor to hope. "I cannot undo what was said," he continued, "but I would not repeat it, not now, nor ever." Eliza considered him in the softened light, seeing not the Duke first, but the man who had been forced into humility by refusal. She recognized the risk he took in speaking plainly, and the greater risk she would take in believing him. Trust, she knew, was not restored by words alone, but by the willingness to relinquish advantage. She told him she had learned something invaluable in his absence, that power could be endured, but self-betrayal lingered. She would not return to a life shaped by another's convenience, nor accept affection that demanded erasure. If she were to remain within his regard, it would be by choice, not circumstance. Harrington accepted the terms without negotiation, surprised by the relief it brought him. For the first time, he was not managing outcome, but responding to it, and the surrender felt less like loss than release. He offered his arm, not as claim, but courtesy, and she accepted it briefly, signaling not possession, but peace. When they returned to the ballroom, the shift between them was perceptible, though its nature remained elusive to observers. Whispers resumed, yet their edge dulled, transformed by uncertainty rather than scandal. Eliza moved through the room with renewed assurance, no longer defined by dismissal, while Harrington stood beside her with a composure reshaped by humility. As the evening waned, they parted without promise, without declaration, each aware that resolution did not require immediacy. What mattered had already occurred, not in grand gesture, but in the quiet exchange of truth and restraint. The future, once dictated by rank and fear, now lay open to negotiation. Outside, carriages waited beneath a pale sky, and London breathed on, indifferent yet changed in small, immeasurable ways. Eliza stepped into the night, knowing she would not be erased again, and Harrington watched her go with the understanding that influence was weakest where respect was absent. Their story did not conclude with triumph or surrender, but with equilibrium earned, a balance struck between power and principle, promising a continuation shaped not by command, but by consent and mutual regard.